There we go. All right, I appreciate everyone taking the time to get on the call today. I know this process is not going to be the easiest to explain, so if you're having everyone together and we just talk through it once, I'm sure there will be many questions that we didn't think about that can help us with this process. I also believe we have DFNA on as well to answer questions on their end for how this process is going to look. Just to get a little bit of background on why we're having this discussion, Act 997 of the 2021 session added a section of appropriation for American Rescue Plan funds. And there was a section of special language, section 39 of that act, that requires all appropriation and expenditures for funding received from the American Rescue Plan to be expensed using this American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 appropriation. In those appropriations, they were directed for federal funds awarded directly to agencies, departments, institutions, cities, and counties, and then federal funds awarded to agencies, which would be like the governor's discretionary. There's two pots, one that's for the funds that go directly to schools, agencies, cities, and counties, and one that the governor awards or the steering committee of these funds awards. But due to that language requiring this and requiring that the CFO of the state keep the audit records for how these funds are spent is why we're needing to develop this new process. Because we need to be able to keep one audit trail of how all of the American Rescue Plan funds are being expensed. So what will have to happen for you all to begin with is when we know we have a plan for how these funds are going to be spent or how much you're going to need, we're going to have to send a request to Legislative Council, to the peer committee first, and then to be reviewed by Legislative Council for the amount of appropriation for each of your institutions. So it'd be like a cash increase letter that we've sent in past times, grant awards asking for increases in appropriation. We'll have to send those requests. And I believe Michael at the FNA had sent each of you the form that will be using to request that appropriation. If you didn't receive it, we can get that to you again as well.
So, Nick, this is for, I'm assuming, expenses that we expense to ARPA. How do you treat lost revenues when you draw those down?
Oh,
because they're not tied, and according to the language of the law itself, they're not tied to a specific expense item.
I agree, but that will be a use of those funds. So I believe what is going to be done is there will be a general ledger account created to reflect lost revenues in the system. It won't be an expense on your books, but in the reporting to DFNA, it will show up on that line for how much you're drawing down for lost revenues.
I have not looked at the form that Michael sent out in a few days because I needed to fill my heart medication first. But I didn't see a line there for lost revenue. So I was just curious.
Yes, sir. I think we'll be creating one for that, and then one for the aid that goes directly to the students as well, because that also has to be incorporated in this report. I saw that reaction, Paul. Thank you. So to begin with, I believe, the first step in the process is to get your appropriation when you have your plan for how you're going to expense. You get the appropriation set up, it's going to be a federal fund appropriation. What we'll need to do at the point when you're ready to draw down the federal funds you should have the idea of what you're going to expense those funds for when you're about to draw them down. But we'll need to have the file that you would normally send to DFNA to report your cash expenses, those BSEG files. You'll need to have one of those prepared in advance of your expenses. When you draw the funds down, you'll send that file along with the funds to the Treasury, to this federal fund. If I remember, this is how the process is going to work, right, DFA guys? And then once they receive that file, they'll turn around and send the funds back to you to cut the checks for those expenses.
Nick, are you saying that we have to send them funds first to the state?
It will,
We're doing that.
it would be a computer transaction, but yes, it would need to be, once you draw it down, it would need to go sent to the Treasury to flow through this separate federal fund, and then it will be sent back to you for you to write.
I guess I'm being specific. Are we cutting a check to the state treasury?
For time, I'm sorry, this is Melanie with DFA. For timing purposes, I would recommend doing an EFT. And then when you draw it back, draw that back as an ACH.
And we will get that account information for you all for the Treasury accounts. So you will have that information on how to.
So do we expect to have those funds returned to us in time so that we don't have any federal penalties for drawing down funds before we're ready to issue? Or are we considering the receipt of DFNA as the actual expenditure that will keep us from holding those funds too long?
And how does that not violate the GAN agreement?
I agree. This is Thomas Pennington from Arkansas Tech. We've got 3 calendar days to match up the drawdown with the expense under the supplemental instructions we received.
Right.
Give me a copy of that. This is Paul Woodson. I'd like to see a copy of that.
Sure, Paul. Can you send me your email address?
I'll send it to you, Thomas.
Well, the GAN itself references the CFR, which goes into great detail on the cash management of federal funds.
Well, I thought what it said was that you try to hit a 3-day window, but that again, it was, this is the object that we'd like to have you hit is 3 days or within a reasonable time period. And what we're trying to do is set this up where it will be a 3 to 4 day window from the date you get the money until it's back in your bank account. Preferably 3 days. But the flip side of this is, and I'll just be as honest as I can be with you. If you have a better plan and you can show me how to do this and meet the letter of the law, then I'm certainly willing to discuss any other options. But this was the only thing I could come up with that would make it work and meet the letter of the law that says you have to have appropriation and you have to use that appropriation to spend it.
Yeah, I got a question. I understand that we have to have the appropriation. I can't find the legislation where we have to physically send the money and then have it sent back.
I can't understand what.
He doesn't see where the legislation is that they have to physically send the money to the Treasury and then get it sent back.
Well, the point being that we don't, see, I can say this. There's going to be 99 people that do it the right way. There'll be somebody that doesn't. And if you don't have the money before you have the appropriation and have it in your bank account available to spend, then you cannot spend that money without the use of that appropriation at the same time, or you at least have the appropriation when you're writing the check. And as I explained to Senator Hickey and to Shane Broadway the other day, I've dealt with people enough to know that what will wind up happening is there will be checks written out of that money and mailed out before the information gets to us and we transfer that appropriation to the school to use. It will happen. Invariably, it will happen. And at that point, then we've allowed you an opportunity to break the law. And that's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to help you comply with it.
What if we send you the appropriation before we withdraw the money from the G5 account? And you can make sure that this money was not withdrawn from the account until we get the approval. This is an audit tools. So the money was not withdrawn until we got the approval on the appropriation.
I'm still of the opinion that matching the funds draw and the appropriation and the approval for that back to you is the best manner for matching this up and seeing that it's drawn at the time that it's supposed to be drawn and out the door. I don't see where, if we were going to do that, what we ought to be able to do is simply go to the legislature and say, here's how we're going to spend our money for the next year, and then go ahead and give you the appropriation and wait for you to draw the money. And that's not what they intended this to be.
But is it that put us in between two contradicting laws, between the federal law and the state law?
Well, again, I want to see in writing where it says 3 days, because what CFR I read in the past, it wasn't a hard 3 days. That was the start of the sentence. Somebody,
I'm sorry, I was gonna say, I think the other piece of this is that language puts the audit responsibility back on the CFO for all of these expenses. So, you know, keeping it all doing the same way, flowing the same reporting way, allows those expenses to be tracked for the CFO in a similar manner across the board. That's the other issue, I believe, was I know all of you get audited independently on the use of these funds as well, but I believe that language putting the audit responsibility for this appropriation on the CFO is the other impetus for having it go through the treasury like this. Am I mistaken in that?
no, you're not. No, you're not.
Because like you said, 99 out of 100 will do it right, and there'll be the one that messes it up for the rest of them.
Hey, Nick, are we sure that there's no federal guidelines, regulations, CFR, anything for preventing us from sending this money, particularly look at the student money, to the state first, and then the state sending it back? Have y'all checked that to make sure? Because it's not in this legislation at all, so we're kind of winging it, I see.
Okay, but to counter that, okay, the money, when you send it to Treasury, is not coming to the state. It is coming to your account with the state. It is still your money. It will be a fund just like your general revenue funds. So you're not giving it to us, you're moving it to a separate account that still belongs to your institution.
Okay, thank you.
And how when I get audited by federal, how can I show them that it's still in my account when it's go to a different account? It's not under my institution name.
It will be under.
The fund will be under your institution name.
It'll just be in the treasury rather than your commercial bank account, still under your institution's name, similar to your general revenue account.
Correct.
I am just curious, are the other states are doing this, or is this just Arkansas State?
Well, we're the only ones that the legislature passed a law like this so far that I'm aware of.
In addition to, this is Shane Broadway, in addition to what was said, we have reached out to the U.S. Department of Education. I have a call into the Assistant Secretary, and then we've also reached out to ask you for a contact in case we feel we need a letter or permission granted from DOE to do what we have to do by the state law. So we'll keep you posted as we learn more information about what and if we need to ensure you don't have an audit issue.
That would make me feel better, because it does feel like that we're, you know, well, I know it's already been danced around, but, you know, it feels like we're going to be, I don't know how we help from being in violation of what the GAN states.
The Gantt or the CR.
Oh,
And I think for the 1%, we are, as you mentioned, 99% they are going to do it the right way and 1%. So we are creating all this hurdle for the 1%.
Yes.
Yes.
The 1% will be a legislative funding. Point that out. It'll be a legislative funding for the 1%. It'll be a legislative.
No, and do understand, you know, this is not us or DFNA saying, you know, this is what we think should be done. This is something the legislature passed, and we're just trying to make that work to be in compliance with the law that they passed. So it's not, you know, us trying to complicate everything on your end as well. It's the
So
most straightforward of a very complicated situation.
can someone walk us through an example of the entire process?
Yes, I will. And I'll also say, just to begin with, you know, for having a plan for how you're going to expense the funds, which is what you have to have when you send your request for appropriation from this account, you know, you're going to have some kind of description of every dollar that you're requesting appropriation for. You need to have the plan for how you're going to spend that. In the discussion we had with the legislators last week, we talked, you know, at least you could come for your full student side, the amount for your total student award, you could request that appropriation, you know, up front. You don't have to have the appropriation each time you're ready to draw down funds on that side, because your plan for that money, for all of it, should be draw down for student aid to students directly. So you have.
that brings up another question, Nick, because oftentimes this is done in rounds. It's not always all of it in one go.
Sure.
So to help me just kind of understand process wise, so we have a plan. Here's how we're going to, the methodology we're using to determine amounts and how we're awarding students. Here's the total we anticipate. So we draw that money down, send it to DFNA. They request it, they send it back to us, then we go through the process, and we actually go through Nelnet as our processor to refund students or pay stipends in that way. But then, you know, all of the money is not used, or for various reasons, it may not hit students' accounts, so it comes back, and then we've got, again, limitations on time when it's got to go back we've got to send it back to the feds. So is that how this process is supposed to work? Am I understanding that correctly? Because I see that as potentially problematic on a number of fronts.
I can't imagine drawing down all of our funds.
Oh, no, and you won't have to draw down all of your funds at one time. You know, the appropriation is just for getting that authority to spend the money. You won't, you know, draw it down until you're ready to make those expenses. So you'll just have your plan, and I'll try to talk through the entire process as best as I understand it. And if I'm getting it wrong, someone please yell at me and stop me.
Nick, I think sending the appropriation, having the plan, that's not the issue. Just having the approval, waiting for the state approval each time we are ready to draw down the money, or, you know, in case of students, you can send the money to students. If they don't cash the check or they don't receive, you're supposed to get that money back to allocate to other students. There are all kind of complicated issues in both.
No, there's not a state approval once you're ready to spend the money. It's just the process of reporting those expenses and having the money flow through that federal treasury account and back to you. You don't have to wait on an approval of those expenses.
Okay,
You send it, it processes, and it comes right back to you within the 3 days. But so to begin with, to start out, you're going to need a plan for how you're going to spend the recovery rescue plan funds. Again, none of this applies to HERF 1 or HERF 2 monies. It's only the American Rescue Plan funds for what HERF 3, I think is what it's called. So you're going to need to have the plan for how you're going to expend those funds. When you're ready to submit that, you put your plan with your request for your appropriation. That would need to go to the peer committee. So you're going to ask for all of the student side at once. I know on the institution side, you know, if you're drawing down institution, you have to draw down at least the same amount of student aid, right? You can't spend more institutional side than you're giving out student aid. But the student side, you could do it all and then follow up with the institution. Am I right on that? As long as the student aid is the part that's going out, the higher dollar amount.
So how often is peer gonna meet?
At least monthly. I think, Shane, we talked about, you know, if it starts getting a problem meeting.
They'll meet more often.
Right.
Yeah,
They'll
at least
meet more
monthly, and they're not going to take off like they normally do in July. They will meet in July. They moved it to a week later in July to accommodate the conference that some members will attend, but they will meet in July, week of the 19th.
So this is Thomas Pennington again. We've got 90 days to make a draw on these funds. And for example, Arkansas Tech got theirs May 10th or May 12th rather. So we've got to do something by August 10th on the student and
we
institutional
do
side.
still have a meeting coming up in June as well. So if you have a plan, we might can ask DFMA to request suspension of the rules or whatever we need in the deadline to get on June here for those that need to get it out the door before that. But again, like Shane said, they are meeting in July as well. So we'll have June and July to get those appropriation requests in for the early piece. So you have your plan, you're sending it over, we get it to peer legislative council, they approve your appropriation, it gets created in this federal appropriation fund in the treasury. So your appropriation is there. And then now you're ready to draw down funds because you want to send some of this money out the door. You'll have the file that you would normally report on the back end.
Hey, Nick.
Yeah.
This is Melanie with DFA.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we had some internal conversations and I apologize not getting back to you before now.
Okay.
So because of the timeliness of this and the fact that occasionally, you know, we have hiccups with the BSEG files, as I know you're all aware. What we would like to see happen is when you send us that deposit slip to put that money into the Treasury Fund, at that same time, send us a direct invoice form and we will get you that form in hand. And those will be manually input, so you won't have to send a BSEG file. We will key those directly in. Those will be guaranteed to pay as soon as that deposit clears Treasury.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I'm not familiar with the deposit slip to put money.
Me either. I don't think we've ever sent money to the Treasury.
Well, it's the same deposit. It's the same form that you would use to deposit money into your cash fund. Y'all send those occasionally.
Okay.
It'll just have different cost center and fund on it than what you normally have.
Okay, that makes more sense. Thank you.
Okay, so you'll send both of those, and then that way the deposit goes in, the invoice goes in, and as soon as that deposit clears through Treasury, which happens fairly quickly within a day, then that invoice is going to pay, and then that ACH will be coming back to you that quick.
Melanie,
Because I have concerns about BSEG files.
Me too.
Melanie, I think that sounds so much better. And I was really worried that things were gonna, how they'll get bogged down and we can't get that processed in enough time. So this sounds like a much better process of getting this done.
Well,
Awesome.
yeah, and I was even thinking, to keep those expenditures separate, you'd have to set up a whole new coding for them.
You will. You
Other than
absolutely
just
will.
a project, yeah.
It'll be a new fund and fund center and cost center for each of you for that bucket of money. Because we want to recognize it. We've got to keep it all separate. So we've got a new fund group that we're going to use there, and it won't be anything you've used before, and it probably won't be anything you ever use again. Okay?
So Melanie, this is Gülizar from Northwest Arkansas Community College. Is the new fund center and new fund for both portions, both for institution and the students, or we will have two?
Now, it will be one appropriation, one fund. You will tell us, you will send us all the money as it comes in, and then you'll send us a direct invoice to turn around and send that right back to you. You will have different GLs on that invoice processing form. You'll have one that's for student aid and one that's for lost revenue or any other GL that we see that you need. And that will be how we tag, here's how much was spent on this, and here's how much was spent on that. Okay? So that meets the letter of the law.
So that's for both portion, the student portion and the institution portion.
Yes, sir.
Yes, both.
So do we send the direct invoice form to alert you that we're sending you the cash and then send the cash? Or does it matter?
I would send the direct invoice and the deposit form at the same time and wire the money immediately. Treasury does have a cutoff time on EFTs. I'm not sure what that is. Debbie, do you know what that cutoff?
It used to be 10:30.
Okay, we'll get you the information on the cutoff time. The cutoff time just means that it's going to roll to the next day, but we will work with Treasury and talk to them. There may be a possibility that in this instance, they could push that out just a little bit for this specific dollar. We'll have that conversation separate. But send both of those, wire the money, and then it will be claimed with that deposit slip just as soon as they can.
And let me clarify, this is Rhonda Stone at Black River Technical College, and Nick had said something earlier about it wouldn't keep us from, I'm a little confused because I thought I'd heard that we could not write a check until we got the money, sent it down and got the appropriation. So, we're ordering, even, we can't even order, or it's I'm a little confused. I'm sorry. I was just trying to, I always try to get the, what are the details about the process that we're going to have to follow.
Now, your general plan for how you're going to spend the money is what you would send to get the appropriation authority. So.
Okay, so you have the authority, but then we can't write the check until we draw down the money, send it for approval, and then, okay.
Now, I wouldn't draw, you don't draw down the money until after you've got the appropriation.
Right.
And then you'll draw it down with your expenses for your actual expenses.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and when we're sending that money back to you, go ahead and have everything ready for it to pay out of your system.
Mm-hmm.
Don't wait for, you're not going to pay it until you get the money because you don't want to overdraft. I'm not saying that. But, you should be able to fairly quickly get those payments out the door as soon as you hear that hit on your side.
I mean, it's, the reimbursement based, right?
Pretty
Basically
much.
is how we are still running this. Okay.
It's reimbursement based, but it's us getting you the money before you cut that check.
Okay.
Okay. And Nick, I'm sorry if I'm stepping all over you, dude.
No. By all means, go ahead.
Nick, I have a question. This is
Yes.
Diane Newton at UCA. Does it matter that we already have an approved MOF for a portion of those funds,
Yes.
of the ARPA funds?
Yes.
So we should not already have an approved MOF for that?
I mean, you can
Did
have
we
the
get a
MOF, or that's how you plan to
Yeah.
spend a
So
portion of the money. But don't expense that part of
Right.
the funding until you get the appropriation. You'll just include that in your plan when you're asking
Right.
for the appropriation.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we didn't get the cart before the horse there.
Because the MOF is just explaining how you're going to finance the project, right? It's not committing the
Right.
money and sending it out the door.
I have a question, Nick. I see, there's two spreadsheets, one for section 37, I believe, and one for section 38. What goes to the Ledge Council as a description? What's the format? Is it those two forms only? Or I've heard on this call 2 or 3 times people mention a general description. Where is that? Is there a separate form for that, or that would go within one of those two spreadsheets?
To request the appropriation?
No, to list what you're spending the money on. Because I've heard the terms, you need to make a general description of what we're doing, like a spend plan. My question is the spend plan the same as the two spreadsheets for each section? Is that confusing?
Which sections are you talking about? I'm sorry.
I'm talking about section 38,
I think kind of what,
37 and 38.
Okay.
And my question is, I understand that's the form we have to use to put the appropriation on. But what we've talked about here is going to the Ledge Council and getting our quote plan approved. Is the plan that would go before council the two spreadsheets for 37 and 38? Or is there another document, a descriptive document of how you're supposed to, what your spend plan is?
Right, Nick. So do we need to write like a cover letter or something that includes, may say, hey, we need, say, 10 million for our student distribution. We plan to 5 million in lost revenue, which, as we said, is not an expenditure. So what is the mechanism to put that, to document that? Is that in a cover letter? Because I don't think that really fits on that form.
Yes, either cover letter or like a supplemental form that you attach to the back of that document explaining. Like I said, with the lost revenue, the legislators are going to see how you determined, like how you calculated that that's lost revenue. And I believe a few of them also wanted to see what you're going to be spending your regular revenues on once you bring it into your fund as lost revenue. Like, what is your plan for those revenues once they become your funding? That may be a separate question that you may be prepared to answer when we get up there in front of them at the committee meeting, but they will want to see your calculation for how you determined what was lost revenue.
All right, question, if that's the case, is there going to be written guidance on that? Because I hear you telling us that, and we could go up there 28 different ways,
Sure.
And if the members are saying they want to see something, should somebody make a form of what they want to see?
And we are working on getting some written instructions on this whole process.
Okay.
I knew getting everyone on one call and trying to talk through it first would probably be better than just sending a written document and having everyone try to interpret what that document said. Because the same with that, everyone could interpret the words 80 different ways. So we are getting some written instructions as well that will go out.
Yeah,
I would say
that would be appreciated, because right now we're working a lot off things that are not in the legislation, if you know what I'm saying here. And we don't want to get steamrolled down there by doing the wrong thing. And
Sure.
there's an intent from a member, I guess we need to know it, but that intent was not in the legislation because you don't see it in there. So we want to maintain ourselves in reality here, but we also want to do the right thing and not get anybody upset what we're doing.
Nick, there are approved ways from the feds on how we can calculate lost revenue. And I somewhat wonder, I think there's like 3 or so. So if we should just specify which of the methods we use from the feds that are allowed under the buy the grant and then just use that as our backup. I mean,
Yes, that would be fine.
and
The
not
other,
make it that complicated. I think we should just stick to what's allowed in the grant and say, hey, this was our methodology for calculation.
yes. You know, and the other thing is, just looking at one of these institutions on the allocation table for SAU, their student portion is 5.77 million. So you might go ahead and send the full request for that 5.77 million in appropriation with your explanation of, how you plan to give that out to students in your justification. The other 5.52 on the institutional side, you may not send the full request for that at once. You may have a plan to spend 500,000 of that now, so you send the plan with the $500,000 request, and then later in the process, you come back and have a plan to spend the other million, and it goes to another committee meeting, if that makes sense. The student side is fairly straightforward because it all has to go to the students, right? So there may not be multiple plans for how you spend that. Where on the institutional side, there may be various things and other items come up. So you may not ask for all of that at once. But you may not know how you are going to spend the entire amount yet.
So just to help me be clear, Nick, or as clear as I can be, when the request is submitted for the appropriation, once that's reviewed, approved, is that then when you go out on G5, pull the funds down, remit those funds to DFNA? And then
Yes, yeah, you have to wait till that
Yes.
appropriation is approved. And then any expenses tied to that plan that you got appropriation for is when, after it's approved and in place, is when you can go out and draw the funds down
does
and
that,
start that process with the FNA.
would that total appropriation that was approved then at that point have to all be pulled down at that point? Or could you pull down part of that approved appropriation, use those funds and pull down the other part that was approved at some other point in time?
As long as it's part of that plan that you submitted when you ask for the appropriation, you don't have to draw it all down at once.
Okay.
And Roger, I would say if you're going to do it at two different times, that needs to be stated clearly in your plan. We're going to draw down this first. We're going to draw this down 10 days later or 20 days later, but have it all in one plan.
Yeah. Or we're going to give a third of it in the fall semester and a third in the spring.
Right.
I don't know if we can be that exact. I mean, I don't know.
Well, maybe not to the dollar amount for each one, but you're
Right.
planning to give a portion of it in the fall and a portion in spring. Your plans for how you're going to distribute it. Like you said, you can't be dollar amount specific to this point, but
The one thing they did mention is if you ask for 10 million and only use 5 of it, you will have to come back with a plan for the 5 that you did not spend. If you're going to use it in some other way, you got to come back. You don't have authority to spend it.
Is that just tied to a timeline? I mean, are we doing the appropriation for example, coming fiscal year 22? And then if we didn't spend everything, we do another appropriation for fiscal year 23?
it would be like, if your plan for the institutional piece said you were going to spend $4 million to fix
Buy
some piece of
computers.
equipment on your campus and it only costs $2 million, you can't spend the other $2 million on something else. You have to bring a separate plan back to how you're going to spend that $2 million that was left over.
Okay.
Does
I
that make sense?
the question maybe for the whole group, because Nick, you said this not apply to CARES or the CRISA funds, but with the federal government giving these monies under the same CFDA and the budget period, it goes back to July of 2020. So on our college, we track these funds under the same fund code, technically for auditing purposes. I'm just asking everyone whether we should be tracking this portion in a separately.
I believe if it's for your audit, that's up to you how you want to track that. the state legislature didn't feel the need to add the appropriation separately for the first two distributions of funds.
Yeah, because the federal government is treating as being one fund with 3 different amounts.
Sure.
Nick, would you say that legislative audit is, I know that this is for the protection of DFA, this process that we're doing this, but is legislative audit clear that of when they come out to do our single audits on our side, that we're protected on our side of how this process is going to work? I mean, are they, all I want to know is, are the regionals and the other folks in legislative audit clear on what we're having to do so that our folks aren't exposed during their single audit?
Frank Airy was in the room when we met with Paul, right, Paul?
Yes, sir. He was gonna get back to us. I hadn't heard anything back from him, but
I hadn't either, but he is aware, and I think we'll follow up once we get the process in place. And I think, let me mention how much I appreciate Paul and DFNA for working with us. I mean, this is so that you will be able to cut your check to your students or to your vendors. They could have done we could have sent the money to them and they could have sent all the checks. What we were concerned about was students not knowing, or vendors not knowing where the check is coming from and what it's for. So it was going to be a bunch of hassle on our part to let our vendors and students know, hey, this money is for you. This is for this bill. And so that's the reason why we figured out drawing down the money, sending to DFNA and sending back to us so that you would be the ones to cut the checks and cut down on confusion on that end.
sir, I appreciate that, but there was no good answer to this situation once.
Oh, no, I agree with that.
Once they
But we figured out an answer at least.
Yeah. And I wasn't kidding earlier this afternoon. I might have been a little short in my answer, but if somebody can come up with a better way that does what we need to do, then we'll go with that answer. And there's nothing, we're not, upset or ungrateful for somebody coming up with a better plan. We just need to do that. And if we can't do that, then we need to get this in writing, get it back over to Frank and ask them to make a comment if they will. The only problem I have concern with that is, I said something to Frank about giving us an okay. He immediately said, oh, well, we can't do that. But I think we can get a little more comfort from that with talking with some of the actual audit team. Maybe in the next week or so, we can sit down with them. Shane, you and I can sit down with them, maybe Julie, and walk through it with them and see if we can get a little more comfort from the words they may give us.
Well, and I appreciate too, Shane, seeking a letter from the Department of Education, because that would certainly help ease my concerns somewhat.
So I have a question. So if we are sending down now a direct invoice form so that we don't have to necessarily send the file in advance, let's say I'm going to buy some technology. And so let's just say my vendor is Dell. So when I actually get the money back and I cut that check to Dell and my monthly file of expenses runs, is that coming out of my cash appropriation at that time? Or am I trying to recode that because I assume the direct invoice will be charged to this new fund and appropriation. So then my purchase to Dell will actually go through my regular cash appropriation? Because I can't have both the direct invoice charged to my new fund and a payment to Dell charged to my new fund, right? I mean,
we would prefer you not to submit the ARPA payments to us through your cash fund at all. those need to be excluded because you've already recorded that expense in Treasury and you've already got your money. So we don't want to mix and match the general revenue and the ARPA. And that cash fund is very specifically used to reimburse you for general revenue expenses. Does that help, Janann?
Yes, thank you. Appreciate that.
Anyone else have any current questions? I'm sure there will be more once
So many.
instructions are on paper.
Are we gonna set up a hotline or something for?
They're all going to Charlene.
Yeah, right before she retires.
So you have about 2 weeks to ask any questions.
Seriously, Nick, should we funnel questions through you or DFA? How do you want us to work the questions?
You can funnel them through me. That's fine. And I will get with DFNA and work on it, but that's fine. Having it all come through me from you guys probably would be.
So you'll have a FAQ on ADHE's website for us.
Sure.
That way, maybe you won't get the same questions over and over.
Right. Yeah. Once we get the instructions down on paper and everything, we'll be able to do some additional things to get all that out there.
I think it's important too to note, in talking with the members, this is not about anything we did or didn't do right or wrong. This is obviously has more to do with the CARES Act money and the executive branch and the kind of the ongoing issues between executive and legislative branches, and that they were not involved in the two previous rounds. And so that's what this has to do with. It doesn't have anything to do that we did something wrong. This is going to be school districts and everybody. We're going to have to go through some kind of process.
Yes, sir. But I do appreciate all of you taking the time to get on today and ask your questions. It's helpful to hear everyone's concerns. Hopefully we can ease some of them and address all of them. Right, but we will get some more guidance on paper and out to you in the near future as well. Be sure to let me know if you have anything, any hiccups that come up along the way, any more questions you have, just email me, call me, whatever you need.
Can we have kind of a process, kind of a written process? So because it's a little bit complicated. So we have kind of a written process that this is what it needs to be done. So we are all on the same page. So no one have their own interpretation for this kind of things. I think that will help all of us.
Yes, I think once we get the final instructions down on paper, we can probably make like a flow chart basically of how the entire process will go.
It'd
Thank
probably
you,
be
sir.
critical. It'd probably be critical, Nick, especially if they move meetings or have multiples, to get the dates
Yeah.
that the info's due to peer, adhere to staff, so it can get on the peer agenda.
Right.
And do we send those requests to
To Michael Crin at DFNA. He's the budget analyst that most of you probably received the email with the rescue plan request form for the appropriation from him. He sent those out.
We appreciate the opportunity to be part of your phone call today, Nick.
Yes, sir. I appreciate the help.
That's
And
what
I'm
you
sure
want.
we will be meeting again in the near future to iron the rest of this out. All right. Thank you all again. Have a good afternoon, and we'll be here for you if you need us.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
See, they still want to use it.